NJ.com and the Star Ledger welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights, with your hosts Steve Politti and Rutgers insiders Brian Fonseca and Pat Lenny. Let's start chopping.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Rutgers Rant. Politti here, Fonseca. We're going to break down the Minnesota game. We're going to talk about where this team stands at the bye week. We're going to look at where this team stands big picture-wise as well. But first, Brian, we were dealt some devastating news at NJ Advanced Media that we need to talk about, that we want to talk about. Todderick Hunt, a longtime colleague, good friend, a Rutgers reporter, a great Rutgers reporter, covered recruiting for years. Covered more than that for our company after that, passed away over the weekend, 44 years old. We're shocked. That's why I can put it. We saw him a month ago. He was in great spirits. Saw his wife, Kiana. They were having a great night out with us with the night that Kevin Manahan, our sports editor, had retired during his party. And just for have this news come, one of those things that when I heard about it, the first rumor about it, no, that's not. It's not true. It can't be true. I just didn't believe it, and I'm sure you felt the same way.
Yeah, it was surreal, and it's hard to believe now. It's hard to take. I didn't realize how young he was. I knew he was older than me, obviously, but to hear he's 44, and his oldest son, just graduated from Georgetown and just entering the prime of his life. It's really beat me up. And Todrick was a great guy. I think everyone that listens to the rant knows that one of our most popular episodes since I've been on the beat was when he got on and joined us to talk about the great recruiting class Rutgers had, and people really appreciated the way he talked about these recruits and broke things down. He was always a resource for me. But what I'll remember beyond him, he was a great recruiting reporter and always was really good at breaking down how kids play. But I always appreciated how he made me feel. He always uplifted everyone in a room. I always felt better after talking to him. He was always had this big laugh that made you feel like the funniest person on earth, and he was always smiling. So, it's really it really hit me hard. We heard Saturday night, and just really tough to take.
Yeah, the thing that I remember with Todrick was we were on the same company, same team, working together, but from different directions of it, right? And there were times when, we're not going out, the team's doing poorly, we're writing critical stories, there's controversies, there's arrests, there's stuff, So I think back to the Kyle Flood final year where it was just getting ugly. And he had to be on the other side of it, where he's trying to get information. He's talking to the people inside the program. And we would have some conversations where I would call him up and it would be like, man, you have got them pissed off in there. And he would just let out this, this big laugh that would be like, oh, I can only imagine what Todrick was hearing from people, the foot soldiers inside the program during all this. But he never let it, I knew we were making his job harder, but he never had held any resentment about it. He never got upset about it. He just understood it was part of it. He laughed it off. And that was part of what made him a great colleague. He'd always roll with the punches when things were going on. He was a guy you could call when there was a controversy, where there was, you needed to hear what people were saying on the ground and, in recruiting circles. I mean, it's just a resource for us.
A lot of respect for him around the New Jersey high school football community.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was clear over the 10 years that I've known him, and it's clear in the wake of his death how much people respected him and were sad to see him go. And I think relentlessly positive is how I would view Todrick. I've never seen him upset. I've never seen him overwhelmed with, this job can get crazy sometimes. I've never seen him kind of take anything too hard. I always felt like he was in sometimes a job that's a lot of clouds. He was this shining ray of light that made us all feel better. And the thing that struck me, he covered recruiting, obviously, and everyone, the big fish are what people care about. And Ashley Smoke-Pierre, the coach at Irvington, made a great point about this. Todrick cared about the little guy as much as the big guy. Todrick did what he could to help the kids that were under-recruited get some attention and get them at schools, because at the end of the day, he cared a lot about the kid as much as he did the football player. And I think that he really did love football, right? He loved the sport. He loved what it could do for young kids. He was a youth coach. He coached his oldest son. And I think that beyond what he helped us do as a company, I think he helped a lot of young kids in and around the state achieve their dreams. So I think that's why people appreciate him beyond his work, is he was a good dude in so many different ways.
Yeah, and that's such a great point because his job was to write about uh, mostly about the athletes who were going to get recruited, whatever he did, like so the top level, the top 50 recruits. But he would see these guys at camp, these kids at the fringes, and because he was so well connected and talked to everybody, he could spread the word. It's like, hey, there's this kid East Orange. Why aren't you recruiting? He could really get out there and kind of spread the gospel about some of the kids who deserved the chance, deserved the scholarship. He took that very seriously. He liked doing it. For me, and this is, professionally, what I admired about him was, the recruiting thing for us, it became a harder beat to get traction on the way things were changing in the industry. There just wasn't a lot of, web traffic, web interest because of, kids announcing their own recruiting on social media. And he made a really cool transition in his career with the help of Kevin Manahan in a lot of ways. And he wrote a lot of these great stories about the intersection of culture and sports, and difficult stories, and just a whole different job, really. Like, I mean, you go from one nuts and bolts, you're writing about who's going where, you're trying to break news, trying to, do the top 50, make lists. And all of a sudden you're writing, how hard it is writing 3,000 word stories about things that are complicated topics that require a lot of interviews, that are sensitive topics. And he really did it well. And I think he was really proud of that, based on what I remember talking to him about it, seeing things he put on social media. We put up a front page with his stories on it. I think his family, his wife, I know Kiana was proud of that. And I just feel bad that we're not going to see what he does next. That's kind of how I was feeling about this. The family thing is just obviously gutting for me too, knowing he how much he loved them. But I was just kind of curious, like what's like the next chapter of Todrick's career is going to be.
Yeah, he was doing really well. And to your point, I know he was really proud of making the front page a couple times, including one story about how much an athlete's hair means to them in an era where that was a big talking point with some kids dealing with controversial moments with referees in wrestling, for example, in high school. On a personal level, Todrick worked with myself, Pat Lanny, and Kevin Armstrong on a series we did about the top 2024 basketball recruiting class that got a top 10 in the APSC awards. And I know he was very proud of that, and we could not have gotten that without Todrick, obviously. So it was cool that, one of the, accomplishments I've had in my professional career, I get to be linked with Todrick for that forever. So, and then the last thing I'll say is that, Todrick was kind of a lone soldier here at NJ.com, going against the titans of the 247s and the rivals, which are these giant recruiting networks. And I just remember it's sticking out to me how much people respected his top 50 that he would do every year of high school recruits. And, people look at the industry standards of 247 rivals, but for him to have weight with what he does as he's one guy, I think that says a lot about how much respect he had around the state, from the players, from the coaches, from the administrators, and from the fans. And I think that the reaction from people who read us, fans that watch us, is also really telling that it was devastating, not just for us who know him on a personal level, but people who have known him, just parasocially. I think he made a big impact, and he will certainly be missed.
Yeah, from young people up to Greg Schiano, who had a really nice statement about him. You could tell he made an impact throughout the football community. So he will be very much missed. And I appreciate everyone else who had written us and texted us to offer condolences and to say nice things about him. Every one of those comments meant a lot. So we appreciate that. All right. Football goes on. Let's dive in. We're dealing with a 31-28 loss to Minnesota. We kind of broke that down, the loss itself, post game in our little live show. You guys watched it or not? I don't know that I think it's at this point that maybe it'd be best to push it forward to the bye week and where this team stands, because I think a lot of the things we saw in the Minnesota game are kind of indicative of where this team is right now at the bye week. There are a lot of bad trends. And I read your story this morning, your 20 observations, and you drill down on a few of them to me that are just glaring, right? That this, the last 4 times in which this team took a lead in the fourth quarter, came back to take a lead, they blew it. I think that is like there you go. Like, if you're looking at a shining siren as to what's going on here, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's an indictment of what this team is. You have a lead in the fourth quarter. You have a chance to win big wins, bowl wins, road wins, home win against Iowa. These games were right there. Can't close them out.
Yeah. That's the we could talk about how we get to the fourth quarter, but once you're in the fourth quarter and you take the lead, this is much more applicable in the NFL, which is always a one-score game in the fourth quarter. But when you're in position to win a game and it comes down to these key plays, these key drives, they haven't been able to make them. And I think offensively, that was clear in the first two games where they've had chances to drive down the field after their defense kind of gave up the lead to take it back. Against Iowa, Ethan is hit as he throws an interception that dooms them to lose. And then against Minnesota, they are driving. They are making progress. Yeah. They're at a point where the worst case scenario is you hit a field goal and go to overtime. You're in good position, and then you just somehow have a bad snap that goes between the quarterback's legs. Like, it's just bizarre way to lose, but it continues the trend of like they're not finishing these games. They're at a point now where they're not losing these games by a billion. They're at a point now where they can beat the lower teams in the league. But when it comes to these middle tier games, these breakthrough games, they have their chances. They're right there, and then they just cannot pull through in the end.
Right. Yeah. And for people who say, well, it's one play, one really close. I push back against that a little bit because there's other things going on here. Like you're seeing, the offense sputters in the second half of games. We think put the numbers, some 73 points in the first half against Ohio, against Iowa, and Minnesota, second half 17, right? The numbers that are, you're looking at, Calic Man is putting the ball at risk in the Minnesota games, a bad trend. Things that, special teams continuing to stink out loud. Like we went on the show, we're like, well, that's not going to happen again against Minnesota. Well, guess what? It happened again. And it's a large reason why you lost. You had a chip shot field goal blocked. It could be a tie game. It could be a completely different game. There's so many things like that that are holding this team back. And again, this is against competition that's it's even level. I would make the argument, and I know what Vegas said. I understand it, that Rutgers was technically an underdog in both those games. I watched both games, and I feel pretty good in saying it was even or edge talent-wise to Rutgers. I don't know if you disagree with that or not. That's kind of how I felt. Certainly at the top level playmakers, you can't tell me it wasn't.
Yeah, I certainly think so. I think these are not games where Rutgers was out-talented and you kind of shrug your shoulders and say, there's really nothing you could do. I think Rutgers, I stand by my pre-game point that Rutgers is more talented than Minnesota, especially considering they were down their top two running backs. Darius Taylor, their starter, is essentially, if he plays, they have a really good chance of winning. They're 12-6, I think the number was. If he doesn't, they're 2-7, right? Like that's how important he is to them. And they didn't run the ball at all. They had 36 rushing yards, but that doesn't matter because the returning issues on the defense where they don't get pressure. Bradley Weaver had a nice game, 2 sacks, but that's it. No pressure. And when you don't get pressure and you have Drake Lindsay with a humongously open pocket, he's just dinking and dunking, and they're not throwing these deep balls aside from the 78-yard pass. They were just getting these little chips, little small gains that made a big difference. And Rutgers can't stop them because there's no pressure on the quarterback and the secondary can't cover. It feels like every game, a different member of the secondary has a really bad game. This time was Jacoby Henderson, but none of them play particularly well. And that leaves you vulnerable when you just can't get off the field because you can't stop anything in the pass game.
Right. Yeah. And it's the same pattern with this team, especially now. We learned early on that they were not going to get pressure with a 4-man front. And when you're a defensive coordinator, you have no one to get the quarterback in that situation. It means you're going to have to mix up. You're going to have to do things. So you see them rushing linebackers. You see them putting 6 guys in, trying to pressure it that way. They're not getting to the quarterback then in a lot of these situations. And then you're dead. That's it. Like there's no genius defensive coordinator here that could come in and figure that out. And I get it. Like, I think that it's clear that there are some coaching deficiencies here on defense. Something is not quite right. It's not adding up. The coverage breakdowns, the things you mentioned on the last show where these safeties are yelling at each other. There's something not quite right there. I completely get that. And that goes back. And if it turns out to be a coaching thing, well, then that's Greg Schiano's fault. Like he hired Rob Smith. He had a chance to hire anybody in the world. He hired a man he fired before. He decided that he needed someone with comfort in that job, that he couldn't go out and get someone with new ideas. He couldn't go out and get someone who didn't know his quote unquote offense. And this is what he ended up with Rob Smith. So if that's the case, if it's coaching, it's on him. I'm making the case though that it's more of a Jimmy and Joe's situation on that defense, with misses on some of these guys who are just not Big Ten level pass rushers, who have not played up to their level, up to their, I mean, you can say it now in college football, up to their salaries in the secondary, players who just aren't contributing, who were misses, who were whiffs in the transfer portal. And if you're going to look at whose fault that is, it's Greg Schiano. Like, no matter which way you pick here, it's his defense to fix. And I don't know, for this season, for what's coming up, it can be fixed.
Yes, I mean, all roads lead back to Greg Schiano, and I think he's not been shy about that. I think he's gone up there and said it starts with him.
Right.
But to your point on coaching, they did try to switch some things up. They did go from man to zone at some point. They did, to your point, start blitzing more. Although one could argue that didn't disguise it particularly well, given Jabomi was at the line of scrimmage within 2 seconds of the play clock starting. So maybe they didn't execute it well, but they certainly tried to switch things up. I do think the issue, in most cases, is the Jimmys and Joes. I know we just said that Rutgers was more talented than Minnesota. Certainly offensively, I think defensively, it's hard to argue that with each coming week. Yes, I will push back on Rob Smith being, Greg hiring him because he's comfortable. I think Greg hired him because he didn't really have many options after striking out on his, first couple of choices, right? I think obviously if he had his pick, he would bring Corey Heatherman back. But Corey Heatherman went to Miami, where he makes a lot more money and coaches a much better defense, evidenced by the fact that Monterey went there, right? So I think Rob Smith was clearly, for all the reasons we could list, the fallback plan. And that's where they ended up with. And I think he's an easy target, and I think he deserves a lot of blame. But I think there are just so many things wrong with this defense that
Right.
What's obvious is that they don't seem to know where they should be, what they should be doing, and what the problem is on most plays. The players, I mean. It just seems like guys don't know where to be. And then that's what happens when on that 78-yard pass, there's like 3 guys on one side of the field guarding 1 wide receiver. And look, maybe that's the scheme. I don't know, but I'm looking at that, and it just doesn't make sense to me. And that's how you give up a 78-yard play.
Doesn't look right. Yeah.
So, and obviously, the key to fixing all of this is playing better defensively. And it's not even just playing great defense. It's not being one of the 20 worst defenses in the country.
Yeah.
I put a bunch of stats in the story. Like, they're alarming. Like, how many yards they're giving up per play. The completion percent. Opposing quarterbacks are completing 69% of their passes in FBS games. It's hard to combat that.
That's not going to get it done. And this is interesting because again, this is the bye week. This is a chance for Greg Schiano to get in there and make some big changes, stuff you can't really do. It's harder to do during a game week. He did it last year. We can say he did it last year. They came out of the bye in a better position than they went into the bye. Certainly, they're going to have to do it again. And I could argue that this time it's against a little harder competition than it was last year. So I don't know what kind of fixes, but he's got to come up with something, or and this is toward the big picture part of it, which is what's more alarming. If they don't come up with something, that this season could get ugly. And I think that's what you're staring at now. If you're looking at where Rutgers is with 7 games left, and we knew the schedule was going to be like this. We knew they were going to have to get busy early on here to avoid that. It looks just as bad as we thought. I'm watching that game like everyone else in the country, Penn State, Oregon, and it's like, okay, those 2 teams are on a different level. Ohio State is going to win the national championship again unless something happens in the playoff. They're a juggernaut. And then, by the way, Washington hung with them for a little bit, couldn't score against them, but certainly looked like didn't get blown off the field. And that's the team that's coming up next. So those are 4 games you've got against I think teams that are expected to go to a good bowl game or the playoff. Then you got Illinois, both same thing, good bowl game or a playoff, and Maryland and Purdue. That's it. So you've got to find wins here. It's not easy.
Yeah, it remains as clear as it was before the season started. Now you're at a point where your margin of error is essentially 1 game. You cannot lose to Purdue or Maryland. If you lose either of those games, it's over. Then you have the 2 other games, Washington and Illinois. You could lose one of them. Meaning if they lose their next game against Washington, they're going to have to go perfect in 3 must-win games, which is a lot to ask for this program at this point, which is why the Washington game in and of itself is a must-win game to avoid that scenario. Now, Washington and Illinois are probably a bit better than Minnesota and Iowa, right? So it's not like you're playing, I mean, they're maybe at the same-ish level, but you are going up a step in competition. So you're going to have to play better to win games against it's a tough spot. Rutgers is in a tough spot. And I understand some people saying, I mean, personally, I don't put much value into a bowl game, and some fans don't really care about whether they go to the Pinstripe Bowl or not, which I totally empathize with. But it is a marker. It has long been a marker in college football where if you go 6-6, you're 500, you're going to a bowl game. It's not a bad season. You hit the bare minimum. If this team in year 6, after 2 straight bowl games, after an underperforming 2024 season, misses a bowl game, goes 5-7, or even worse, 4-8, after everything the transfer portal haul they brought in, after the offense being the best it's been in 17 years or whatever the number is, that's going to be a hard thing to overcome in the offseason, whether it's recruiting kids out of the portal, whether it's convincing fans that the program is going in the right direction, and just keeping people from totally melting down, because you can feel it the last 2 weeks, people starting to get off the bandwagon and showing some outward frustration at what is happening with this program at this point when things seem to be stalling.
Yeah. I mean, I can't blame fans for being impatient. I can't. And it's, and I think it's not just the pie in the sky fans who are impatient. It's the realistic fans who are impatient, the ones who do not expect Oregon on the banks of the old Raritan. Like, I think it's the ones who just think that this program should be taking the next step against these teams, against Minnesota, against Iowa, against Nebraska, a bad Nebraska team last year, against programs that are just on that same level. That's not happening. And I think that's where the frustration is. And you put the record in, it's Shiano's 13-34 against the Big Ten in 2.0, with one win against a team with a winning record. That team's Northwestern, right? I mean, they have not beaten a team that they didn't beat the first time around. Is that like before? Is that the other stat that you put in there?
They've beaten Minnesota. Minnesota is the one team they've beaten, and Washington. Those 2 teams from last year are the 2 teams they've beaten that they had not beaten before Shiano arrived.
Yeah.
Washington was never a chance. I mean, Ash did play them twice, but it was his first 2 seasons, and they weren't technically a Big Ten team. So yes, if we're counting the original 14 Big Ten teams, I think Rutgers had beaten 7 of them. I have to go back and do my math, but the point being, Rutgers has only beaten 1 of the teams that they had not beaten before Shiano, and they've had a lot of chances against Iowa, against a downtrodden Nebraska team, against a downtrodden Wisconsin team, right? Against, they've had their chances. They beat Minnesota last year, and they probably should have beaten them this year. It's just, the thing is, you could accept them not winning these games 1, 2, 3, each of them in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. But when they're all happening like this, when you fall short against Nebraska on a Friday night, against Iowa in a 1-score game on a Friday night, against Wisconsin on the road, like the frustration adds up, and it just feels like by accident when you're playing these 50-50 coin flip games against these teams, you'd win at least one of them, and Rutgers is just not able to. It's a glass ceiling. They're not able to break through.
I will say there are 2 ways. There's still 2 ways that this season can be salvaged. The first way we described already: you win, you find a way to get bowl eligible. You get there. You beat these teams that you're supposed to beat, or you can beat on the same level. You get the 6-6, and I think at least then you are at the same level. You didn't go the wrong direction. Right? At least you're at the same level. That's one way. The other way is to somehow throw a haymaker against one of these teams. And I'm gonna put Illinois on the list. It's on the road. I think they're gonna be really good. They'll have a good record. I know they got curb stomped by Indiana, but you beat one of those teams. And I think that even if you're 5-7, people will at least have that memory of like, hey, man, if only we had gotten that Minnesota game, we'd be, we blew it. But at least we had this win. We had something good happen. Those are the 2 ways I think that could, that at least you could salvage something from this and feel good about it. And we'll see. Greg Schiano was pretty defiant about, we'll be back. This team's got more in it. I think he can at least, he hasn't certainly not lost the team. He can sell them on the fact that they were better. Like they ran for 100 and something yards against Minnesota. It was 160 yards against Minnesota, that they pushed them around, that they had a bunch that they should have won these 2 games. And I think that is one way, he can keep them engaged and show them that and say, look, we are better than our record. And I think that's got to be the message that they have right now in the Hale Center.
Yes. If you beat Illinois, you get the monkey off your back of the 15 years without a ranked win, 16 years without a ranked win, and you have a signature win, and you feel good. If you upset one of the big 3 somehow,
right,
then you took a step forward this season, I think, even if you miss a bowl game, in my opinion. We've talked about it, but to be able to sell an upset over a top 10 team, the way these 3 teams are playing, again, as unrealistic as it is, if you're able to do that, that is beyond anything Greg has done in these 6 years, in my opinion, just how much value it would get. That would salvage the season, absolutely. On the running, Antoine Raymond, I'm glad you brought this up, is Kyle Monangai reincarnated with each passing week. He's playing in a very similar way, and he's breaking tackles. He's running hard. He's bailing out the offense when it's having some lulls. He's making big plays. He's pass blocking really well, right? You don't really appreciate the pass blocking until Antoine Raymond comes out, and Sam Brown, who's playing his first game in a year, to be fair to him, just whiffs on a block and gives up a sack. Like, those are the things that you don't understand how valuable they are until you don't have them. So Antoine Raymond is really, really impressive for a sophomore, is picking up exactly where Kyle Monangai left. And that's another reason to be encouraged, that your offense is not this, one-dimensional Ethan Kaliakmanis throwing to his 3 receivers. Like, you have a running back too. And that's important, because if you look at Ian Strong, 11 of his 29 catches are contested. 14 of his targets are contested. They're shading a safety to him every time. They're always trying to double team him, right? So they're making life harder for your best weapon. And yes, KJ Duff picked up the slack. DT Sheffield had a nice game. But when you have to counteract the way teams are defending you, so to have a guy who can run the ball the way Antoine Raymond does, that is very encouraging for the offense, which, again, I think we agree here. Even if the defense does get better, the offense is going to have to carry the load for the rest of the way if Rutgers wants to win any of these games.
Right. All right. Let's dive into some questions from the Discord, which was hopping during the game, as you can expect. And this is a theme, with a bunch of them, was what is the long-term ceiling with Rutgers, with Shiano 2.0, is the one question. And along those lines, do the comments of Tate regards to Greg Schiano, he told me that he's the per capita best coach in college football, and everyone should shut up, essentially, is what he said to me. Although it was before the Iowa game, but still, that he's on the record of saying pretty much we've got the best coach for our money in college football. So clearly that he was strong about that. Do the comments of Tate plus his contract lock Rutgers into him pretty much indefinitely? I can envision a scenario where he's gone in the next 2-3 years, barring an unforeseen external event. I can foresee a scenario, but it's going to be him walking away, and I don't think that's going to happen. But I think, the comment to me that's more important to than Tate's comment about per capita is him when he said to me, I will decide when this is over. Like, I think he kind of gets that like the contract, the extensions, the number of years on it, it's going to be his decision to walk away. He is not going to be fired as Rutgers head coach. It is unimaginable to me that that's what's going to happen. And I don't know how long he wants to coach. I don't know. There have been times when I thought that this was wearing him down. There have been times when he looked like he was exhausted by the job late in the season. I think, the fact that he was, going to meetings to raise money on Thursday nights of game weeks, it was not something he foresees himself doing. I think that got tired. But now you would think, because he does have 2 people who are doing that part of it, and the president and Kelly Zinn, the new athletic director, I do believe that, perhaps that would give him some juice to know that, all right, like if I'm him, certainly I am thinking, let's see what happens here with Kelly Zinn. Let's see if she can do what Pat Hobbs wouldn't do, didn't try to do, what he couldn't, what Schiano couldn't do in his part-time, I think that's going to be part of his calculations going forward.
Yes, I just don't envision Greg not finishing out this contract. I think it's the 29 season, 28 or 29. I think it's the 29 season, or maybe even 2030.
Longer than that, yeah.
I think it's 2030, 29 or 2030.
Okay.
I don't see him not finishing out the contract. Certainly, he's not going to get fired, right? He's just not going to get fired. And I just don't see him walking away, because I think he wants to finish what he started here at Rutgers and deliver another unforgettable season, right? I think that's his ultimate goal, and to put Rutgers at a point where it has sustained success. Right. What is the ceiling under Schiano? Is this my counter question to that is he working with the same level of investment NIL wise that he had with this roster, roughly in the same ballpark in comparison to his peers for the rest of his tenure? Or are we expecting the money that he has to increase? Because I think the answer is very different depending on what the answer is to that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. But I do want to say, like, he's not operating with zero money. Right. There is some money in the kitty. Two things. There's some money in the kitty, and also, the rev share kicked into effect. Like, he's got that money. So let's before we just say, oh, he's operating, they went out and they did get players in the market. I think they have some NIL. We don't know. We don't have the numbers in front of us. We're told we know it's in the bottom part of the top of the Big Ten. It's not going to be Ohio State. So what you want to slot it in the middle? Do you want to slot it in like mid-range NIL area? And you go off that.
Mid-range is big, right? Like, it could be the upper middle range, it could be lower middle range.
Yeah.
Here's what I would say. And money doesn't excuse everything, but Indiana did not become an absolute juggernaut because Curt Cignetti is the reincarnation of Nick Saban. He's a good coach. Indiana has a lot of donors with a lot of money who put a lot of it down when he got hired, and they got a lot better players. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Greg would be 16-2 if he was the head coach of Indiana in the same exact situation over the last 2 years. I can't know that. I feel pretty confident that if the Indiana roster and Indiana schedule were what he had at Rutgers over the last 2 years, that he would be better than their 4-7 in their last 11 Big Ten games. I think they would have a better record than that if he had access to that. So I think there is a certain ceiling you're hitting with what you're working with. I think there's a reason Tate made a point to say he's the best coach per capita. So that to me is the answer. Now, let's just assume, because it's be irresponsible for us to assume Rutgers is suddenly going to hit an oil rig and make a bunch of money and suddenly have an Indiana moment. That's unrealistic. So let's assume that they're roughly in the same range over the next 4 years. What's the ceiling? I think at the next 4 years, 3 years of a 6-6, 7-5 range, and then 1 year where everything kind of aligns and they win 8 or 9 games, right? I think that's the realistic, and I don't think people will like that.
Right.
I think we're reliving Groundhog Day of Greg 1.0, right? Where he's brought it to a certain level. He's having a hard time bringing it to the next level, and people are frustrated about reliving similar games and similar seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's different between 1.0 and 2.0 is people are seeing Indiana. Like, fans are seeing how quickly it can turn around for a program like that with the right investment, and they're not putting 2 and 2 together about the investment part of it. And I think that's it. Like, there's frustration because it is possible. It's like a very fascinating debate for me, because I will say this: the other thing that's different between Greg 1.0 and 2.0 is that, really, other than this part of the NIL, Rutgers is a well-funded football program, right? Like, they're paying their coordinators 7 figures. Like, they went out and they wanted Kirk Shiraka from Minnesota. Okay, we're going to give him a buttload of money. We're going to extend his contract. They are spending on football to a level that Penn State's spending on football. I know that not on players, on like institutional money, on support staff, on travel, on food, on all of these other things that Rutgers never was in the ballpark with, are now pretty comparable. Of course, the game changed between then and now. And now, the money that they can give to contracts for players, it's a different ballgame. I understand that. Different pot of money. It's a whole nother thing. But it's part of the equation, right? I mean, this is not the days when Greg Schiano got here and there was like one computer in the study hall. These things that happen, like, you look back on those days where everything was broken. It's not that case. It is no longer that way, for sure.
Before we move on to the subject of money, I do want to be clear, because people might see what we say about Greg and compare it to what we say about the basketball program, which we killed we said NIL can't be the excuse. I will say this: look, NIL does play a factor. It's naive to not think it does. And NIL is not the reason Rutgers didn't beat Iowa in Minnesota, right? Their
True.
NIL investment was enough for them to beat Iowa and Minnesota. What I will say is this: the style that Rutgers plays, the risk-adverse nature of the way they look at the game, makes it so that when you are at a roughly talent equality, it makes it harder to win. If they had the Jimmies and Joes, right, and they played the same exact way, they would just win more games because they are better, right? I think the way they view it doesn't what's the word I'm looking for? Accentuate. It doesn't make them better enough to beat these teams. So that's part of it as well. The money isn't the only reason, but it is a reason.
It certainly is, and the biggest, I would say. But yeah, it's fascinating, and I don't know. Yeah, and there's another question that came up, and it's a great one. The president says he's amazed with what Schiano's been able to do with NIL. We know it's low. If the money changes, or if Schiano was at Ohio State and was picked the head coach, is he still struggling to make the championship, to make the playoffs? Being like, is it really only money, or is there something, And I don't know. It's a great point. Like, I think you're looking at, I think Greg Shannon would love to find out, but you're looking at James Franklin. Then that's the other scenario, right? Like, you've got everything, and you're losing to Oregon at home, and then with the best atmosphere in the world. Like, you're not beating these top 10 teams. You're not advancing a program to where people think it should be into the preseason. Same thing happens again and again and again. Eventually, you've got to look at that and say, like, right, we got to, it could be the coach. Yeah, I don't know. We don't know. We cannot project. I'm sure, Greg Schiano sitting there with Ohio State's roster. Would they be, in the playoff, one of the national championship?
Right. Different levels, right? It's different sides of the same coin, because the James Franklin discourse is eerily similar to the Schiano discourse. I did have I'm watching people react to the Penn State stuff, and I'm like, this all sounds so familiar, just from a much higher level. Yeah, we'll never know, obviously, but it is a fun hypothetical. Like, would with a better roster, would Greg? Yeah, like, the Ohio State thing is perfect. I think at Ohio State, anyone with any level of football competence could win 10 games. They're just so much better than everyone else, right? Like, I won't say that I could coach Ohio State to a win over the worst team in the Big Ten, but I mean, it's not that far off, because you're just so much better. The question is, can they elevate them past the big boys where the talent level is the same? That's the question we're asking here. It's not Ohio State versus Oregon, for example. It's Rutgers versus Minnesota.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. All right, moving on to some other topics. Digging down on defense, do you see anyone on this defense who has stepped up to be a leader? O'Neal seems to have a fire lit under his ass at James Madison, but I don't see that same swagger now. I can't think of a current player who has that edge to them. Okay, I can't. I don't have I thought it was going to. I don't know. Like, who do you think it was going to be, and do you agree with that? Is there a leader missing on that D?
There's a fiery leader, like an outwardly leader, like that this question is pointing at. I think Jabomi is a leader, but he's certainly more of a lead by example guy, not much of a talkative, demonstrative guy. I would agree that the issue is that there's not guys that have been here for years. Like last year's senior laden team, Tyrone Powell was here for 4 years. Robert Longerbeam was here for a long time. Aaron Lewis was here forever. So it's harder for a guy like Eric O'Neal to come in here, move up to the Big Ten, and just suddenly take over a locker room if he doesn't have that level of personality. So no, I don't see it. But let's not frame the lack of leadership for the reason the defense is struggling. I think if that does play a factor, it's a very low percentage. The factor is the talent gap that's there in coaching much more than the lack of leadership.
Right. Question: can you share your thoughts on special teams and Coach Eddie Allen? Iowa and Minnesota combined for 269 yards in returns compared to just 5 total yards for Rutgers. I'm going to take the questioner's word for that. Sounds about right. I add in the Foreman's field goals and Iowa's kickoff return for a touchdown, and you wonder whether we're 5-0 with better play from that unit. You could be. You certainly could be 5-0 with better play of the unit. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know anything about Eddie Allen. I've always thought this to be Greg Schiano's as special teams coordinator. And certainly the punt block is his baby. That was really good early on. It hasn't gotten to the punter the last couple of games. Obviously better competition. The field goal thing, it confounds me. And I do wonder if the kickoff return thing is a lack of depth in the program. That's usually those guys who are running back kickoffs and are the ones who are, lower on the roster. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, KJ Duff had a fair catch on a punt, and DT Sheffield had another. I think he was the one that had the return. Those are two of your three starting
But on the
receivers.
coverage, right? Yeah, I hear what you're saying. The guys who are blocking and right.
Yes, well, the coverage. The issue is that you don't have your point, the depth, right? So you don't want to risk your starters on special teams to get hurt. So you got to play players lower on the roster, and obviously the quality lowers as the lower you go down the roster. Sure. I agree with the premise that special teams cost them against Iowa, and special teams kept them from, the 3 points you would have gotten on the field goal in the first drive would have sent you to overtime against Minnesota, right? But they also could have scored a touchdown instead of running the ball 3 straight times, got in the end zone, and it'd be a moot point. But yeah, I think special teams is a thing you don't notice until it either wins you a game or loses you a game. Right now it's losing Rutgers a game. The field goal thing, to your point, I have no explanation how Jay Patel can go from making 18 straight to he looks unrecognizable. So that's a major issue. Like if he can't come back from this, it's going to cost Rutgers more games.
Right. Or you'd hope at least they'd be close enough to, where it would. But yeah, it's a huge concern. No question. All right. Those are most of the questions here. We're already about 45 minutes. What else? What else we got? Anything else going on in the world of Scarlet Knights? A little soccer, field hockey?
No, I got nothing. I've been wrapped up in Rutgers football, which to that end, I think a lot of fans can agree with this. I think the bye week comes at a great time. I think the fans are very frustrated watching this team. I think the back and forth nature of covering these games is just, I was a nervous wreck in the fourth quarter, writing my 5 observations when the game that can go either way. I think my nerves can take a week off. So I'm kind of relieved that we'll have an open week this weekend. I don't know about how you feel about it, but I certainly am glad to have a weekend off.
Yeah. A weekend's off are nice. I'd like to do that. Sure. Yeah. You only have to work on Sunday when you go out to watch the Giants, although they won. That's exciting. Who could have imagined that happening? Covered a win in the NFL. Woo! Jackson Dart. Thrilling. All right. Huge. All right. Let's wrap it up there. Again, thanks for listening. Once again, Todrick, we salute you, man. We're going to miss you. And we'll be back next week to preview the Washington game. Thanks.